Hey everybody, welcome to episode 2 of the introduction, part 2 of the introduction for the Silent Fire podcast. We had some technical difficulties with the end of episode 1, namely the recording length of the video.
Right. And battery life.
And battery life and all that. So we're just learning as we're going. So anyway, now we're in episode 2 of the introduction, or part 2 of the introduction. So technically, I guess it's episode 1, part 2.
Part 2.
Regardless.
A&D,
This is Silent Fire, a podcast. I'm Joshua Hofford. I'm with Wind Ministries. You can check out windministries.ca. We've got lots of resources on there, articles, videos, all kinds of stuff. So check that out. And I'm with
Colin Nicole, and I'm the parish priest at the parish of St. Mary and St. John here in Summerside, and we can be found at stmaryandstjohn.com.
And so if you're in Summerside,
check us out.
Check out
Come by. We're right
St.
downtown.
Mary's downtown, or St. John's out in Eleanor. So come check out it's a beautiful, beautiful location. Actually, I haven't seen the inside of St. John's.
It's also beautiful.
I'm sure it's also beautiful. These I love old cathedrals. Anyway, so we talked in the first episode about your journey but being raised in Roman Catholicism and then encountering Anglicanism through King's College and the seminary.
Yeah.
And then I shared about my time with Streams and coming up to Canada and interning, and then becoming aware of the early church fathers. And you came into it through the seminary training and reading and studying some of that stuff. I came into it because it wasn't normal in my context.
Right.
And heard other people talking about it and got intrigued. So anyway, what we want to talk about in this episode, in this part, is how did we meet? What are the things that drive us? That kind of stuff. So, Colin, I can tell my part of how did Colin and I meet, because it was through Instagram. Really, It's the social media age.
Yeah.
I had been to Summerside once before, and so I was getting to know people. I had spoken at a church and taught here in Summerside, and found, I find it funny. This is something maybe 1% of the viewing audience will find funny.
I hope so, yeah.
I saw Colin's Instagram when I was browsing through, and I liked the pictures, and his tagline on Instagram was pseudo Dionysius.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who are laughing right now, I really love you.
Yeah.
Those of you who are like, what's so funny about that? That's okay. Eventually, if you keep listening, you'll get it.
Pick it up.
Dionysius was the guy at the Areopagus in Acts 17 that Paul has a conversation with and wants to know more. And pseudo Dionysius was an author who adopted Dionysius' name. I mean, conceivably, because if you look at some people hypothesize that it still was the
same fellow,
the same guy. Anyway, we'll talk more about him later. But so his pseudo Dionysius was the guy who wrote under the name of Dionysius. So I thought it was funny that Colin was the pseudo Dionysius. Anyway, so then we met in real life.
In Staples, of all places. Yeah. I can't remember if you recognized me first or I recognized you, or
It might have been one of those.
or a yeah, that's right. Wait a
It
minute.
must have been the mustache.
It might have been the mustache. Yeah, that's recognizable feature. But yeah, no, we ran into each other in the in Staples, and I think we went out for coffee soon after and discovered sort of mutual appreciation of church fathers and theology and all that. So and coming from two different worlds, I think, which was really, really neat for me to encounter someone that's not from the kind of traditions and worlds I've been in, that's sort of encountering the same stuff I had been in.
And you were obviously attracted to that. I mean, you married someone that wasn't.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, married an evangelical. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. What drives us? What's the thing in your, as you now you're pretty Roman Catholicism, Anglicanism, not even, and you had said not even really thinking you were going to be a priest or anything.
No,
that wasn't
not at all.
So what did you eventually discover as you were going through training and all that, and learning and all that kind of stuff? What did you discover? What began to drive you? I mean, at 19, starting to realize there's something about this Holy Spirit moving in the chapel. What is it that drives you today?
I think in a lot of ways what drives me today is the same thing that drew me to begin to think that I was being called into some kind of ordained or vocational ministry. Was that I used to, even when I was going to the chapel in the beginning, I'd go and I'd sit, and worship was really beautiful and it was moving, but I never felt like there was a way in which I couldn't enter into it. And it wasn't until I was invited to actually serve in the worship,
Right.
and to be a part of it, that I began to kind of feel like I had found a place. And so I think for me, a lot of it has been is actually serving people,
Right.
in many different ways, right? Like, I mean, serving them through facilitating the worship, serving them through, being available for pastoral counseling,
Right.
serving them through teaching, serving them through simply being available to them. And so that's what has sort of, I think, got me to this point and drives me in a daily way is you get up and it's a new day, an opportunity to just serve God's people and to
Right.
and to love them and to help them to come to know God every day, God willing, you hope anyway.
Right.
Some days are better than others, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, that's right.
And I love to see people. Teaching is a big part of my ministry.
Right.
So whether it's through Bible studies or we're doing book studies or whatever, helping people to grow spiritually, just seeing them kind of, I think in a way, have similar experiences that I had of realizing things they never realized before, or
Right.
coming to understand more about who we are, both as Christians and as Anglicans, is a big motivator and thing that moves me to do what I do and to especially give thanks that I can do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I could sum it up then, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the way you discovered a passion for introducing people into the same thing you discovered.
Yeah.
And you said it's when you started serving in the worship services themselves is when you really started to enter into that mystery, that knowing, that union with Christ and exploring that and going deeper in that.
I remember having, if I could just sort of tell a story.
Please.
I remember having this was like intense time of conversion for me.
Yeah. This when you're 19, 20?
About 19, 20,
Okay,
yeah. So I'm studying all this stuff in my undergrad. My life and heart is just being sort of like turned upside down by, I don't remember exactly what it was that day that I was studying, but I was just being like ripped apart by this stuff, and and everything was changing for me. And I remember I was on the bus. I didn't live at school. I lived with my parents, so I was taking about an hour bus ride one day. And I was taking the bus in, and we were going through Dartmouth where I lived. And I just remember I was reading something, and it was just this really powerful quote or whatever. And I looked out the bus window. I'm kind of just thinking about it, and I look out, and I just see this guy going across this vacant parking lot.
Right.
And I don't know who he is. He just looks a little bit, maybe he's not having the best day, or it looked a little bit rough.
Right. And
I just remember kind of being like overcome by this feeling of I desperately wish that guy could have the experiences I'm having.
Right.
I'm almost being why I hope he can, or
Right.
I'm praying he can, because I'm I think that he would really like this, and
Right.
his life would maybe be changed like mine feels
Right.
like it's being changed. So definitely, that early time and my life still is wanting to see people, I think,
Right.
Yeah, come to that sort of.
So that being a demarcation moment, it obviously stood out to you.
Absolutely.
Which that makes sense given the Gospels, right? Jesus, when he healed, he was moved by compassion. Almost invariably, every time you see him work a miracle, it says he was moved by compassion.
Yeah.
That was really the impetus for his ministry. I love Brennan Manning. I'm assuming you're familiar with Brennan Manning. Maybe no. So Brennan Manning was Roman Catholic, but then he got married, so he got kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church. Found his home in the Evangelical Church. But basically, he did a study on the word compassion. Splagnitomai, I think he said it is what it meant. I'm just quoting him, so I haven't done the study itself. But he said it basically means that the bowels of Jesus were wrenched. The word itself is so deeply visceral. Yes, that it's not just a I feel love for this person, but which sounds to me like there was this deep.
Yeah.
Oh my! If he just knew and felt.
Oh, I could have hopped off the bus that day and been like, "Hey, man, come read this with me right now, right?"
And he would have been like, "Who are you?"
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
You never know. Maybe he would have fallen down on his face and said, "God is among you." Right?
Yeah.
That's a very very biblical response as well too. Yeah. So, that's beautiful. I think in a way, it's just funny thinking about your journey and my journey, and. Because I can think of some key moments I had where the Lord really touched me, and really, if I were to articulate the thing that drives me, it's that people would experience God the same way that I have, and not just me. The same way that I've seen then in experiencing Him and drawing close to His heart, and just seeing the beauty of God to reach through my brokenness, and not even pay heed to what I would consider all the things that disqualify me for life and for anything, but not even pay heed, but see something beautiful in there and pull it out.
Yeah.
That to me, I mean, the beauty of God is his willingness to look beyond anything and see you for what you are, for what he's created you, the creation that he originally intended you to be. And I saw God doing that in me, and then I discovered men and women, of course, along the way. Like I love Walter Hilton has a book. He's a 12th century guy who has a book called The Scale of Perfection. And he goes through the various different experiences and stages of growth you go in. And part of coming to an awareness of how beautiful Jesus is just to see how depraved you are.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And the distinction between those two things. I've mentioned to you a couple times, and I can't remember if I said it in our first episode, Emilianos of Semenopetra, the Greek Orthodox monk, he talks about the sacredness of God being the set-apartedness of God. And that the only way you come to know the sacredness of God or the holiness of God is you realize what you don't have.
Right.
And so you look in yourself and you go, I've seen all the ways that I'm disqualified in that. And so seeing the beauty of God is a deeply humbling thing. And I recall I had an experience one time where I was reaching out to a friend and at this particular friend's house praying for this friend and just was deeply moved by I was actually weeping. I mean, it's like snot running down. And as I'm weeping, I'm just overcome with this deep grief. And I knew it was the Lord's grief. It wasn't me. I hadn't worked it up. I knew I was feeling something of God's heart. And as I'm feeling this, I begin to see this very distinct, for lack of a better term, a vision, an inner vision playing out. And I mean, it was almost like I was seeing what I was seeing in my heart was more than what I was seeing in the natural. And the vision was basically Jesus on his ground crying out, on his knees crying out to this particular friend of mine who was in a real desperate place, saying, I just want to talk to you. I just want to be with you. I just want to have a conversation. I want to help you. And every time that friend would turn away from Jesus, I could just feel his grief and his heartbreak over the one that would turn away. And I was weeping and weeping over that. And that particular experience had a deeply profound impact on my life, that he just wanted to be there with the person, walking the person through the suffering. And what broke his heart is their unwillingness just to turn to him and accept the fact that he wanted to be Savior. I was just reading Psalm 18, I think it was today, and it says, my God, my rock, my defense, and my Savior. And I realized that when we don't turn to God as our rock, defense, and Savior, we turn to ourself, and we turn to hard-heartedness, isolationism, and defensiveness. And we become our own saviors, and we totally muck up our whole lives because of it.
Of course.
But there's obviously more to each of our stories than just those moments, but it's interesting how you have these demarcation moments.
Absolutely.
Where you just see things so clearly. You see the heart of God so clearly. And like I said, what articulated the heart of God to me was feeling his grief over one person turning away from him. And my brain would go to like imagine, they say there's about 7 billion people in the world now, right? And then there's how many Christians is it? I can't remember the number, 2.2 billion or something like that. Something like that. And that's, just imagine that all 2.2 billion of those Christians are perfectly pleasing to the Lord, which is probably impossible.
Right.
It's depending on how you describe the pleasure of the Lord or understand the pleasure of the Lord. But imagine that all 2.2 billion are perfectly pleasing. That means there's 4 or 5 billion that his heart is grieving over that haven't turned to him. And so my brain would go like, God, why do you do this? Why would you be that way? How could you possibly care enough to, like, if it was just me, I would just like kill them all. You hurt me. Why would, right? But his heart is, I love the statement Jesus makes in the gospel that his heart is meek and lowly. And so I just see that the tenderness of God is so beautiful.
Which is, speaks so much to the amazing thing that I always feel like in our worship and in my preaching and even in our hymnody and stuff, you're always trying to keep this balance between helping people to understand like the like utter transcendence of God and also like the profound immanence.
Yes.
Right? Like that God is like in so many ways, as we're going to be talking about through this podcast, a mystery and like be completely beyond our understanding.
Exactly,
And at the same time, it's like he knows everything in Josh's and Colin's heart and everything in your hearts. and like loves you for it, right?
Right.
And we had this week for Anglicans and for denominations that recognize that it was Ash Wednesday at the beginning of Lent, 40 days. And Ash Wednesday is a lot of things, but one of the things that Ash Wednesday is about is this reminder, as you were sort of saying earlier, of like our just complete frailty.
Yeah.
Right. Like we have ashes, which are ancient symbols of penitence and grief and mourning, put on your head, and you're basically told the words that we say in summation are, you're going to die. You came from dust, and you're going back to dust.
That's right. Thoroughly biblical.
Thoroughly biblical. But and the wonderful thing about all of that, though, and is the fact that later on in that service we have Holy Communion, and so you're kind of given at once this image of our frailty, our fallenness, our brokenness, and then you're sort of reminded of like that no matter how many times we turn away, when we turn back, God's never kind of turned away from us. Like there He is grieving for our turn, right? And so it's one of my favorite days of the year, and for that, because it's one of the few times where we're kind of explicitly like,
you're dead.
You're dead.
If you're not dead now, you're on your way to
You're
death.
on your way, but there's good news.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Well, I just this morning was reading. It's interesting you said that, and I hadn't even connected to Ash Wednesday because, again, in the evangelical world, Ash Wednesday is a neat day, but it's not so intentional. Some churches, but the liturgical calendar of Ash Wednesday and practicing those rhythms. It's funny that in especially, I guess, in the charismatic world, we practice a calendar rhythm, but we just don't think about it because we do the same conferences year in and year out. We do sermon series, all that kind of stuff. Right? We still have a calendar we adhere to. We just don't call it a liturgical calendar, but it really is there. Sorry to offend any people that don't like the liturgy, but anyway, or liturgical calendar. But it's just reading this morning that the practice of the spiritual disciplines is the practice of death.
Right.
And I hadn't thought about it that way, that you have the disciplines of negation and the disciplines of addition, right? Worship being an addition of the life of God, the presence of God, but negation being the fasting, the solitude, the silence, those things that you're actually emptying yourself. And in a way, in the emptying of yourself, you're practicing death.
Yeah.
And you're preparing yourself for death, for the life of the age to come.
Right.
And I just hadn't connected those two. Yeah. So anyway, you're making me think.
Good. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah. If we're not thinking, then what's? So why did we come together saying let's do a podcast? What's the purpose behind us doing a podcast for you anyway?
Well, I think for me, it's there's a lot of reasons. One of them is that I think there's a complementary thing kind of going on between our backgrounds. And we're going to be obviously sharing this, both through Josh's ministry and through the church and more broadly. And I think it's always good for Anglicans, for people not just in my congregation, but people in my circles to kind of hear, like this sort of perspective. And maybe hopefully the same is true for people in your circles too.
It is. Absolutely.
And so there's certainly that. One thing that I have to admit, and I don't think I've told Josh this, but one of the reasons I know we can take a minute here to edit this, but one of the things that I kind of look forward to is that, when you're in parish ministry, when you're in not a city especially, it can be kind of intellectually lonely. Like you may not have people to engage with things that you're thinking about the way you could when I was in school, right? Like I was surrounded by people that were doing the same things as me. So it is an opportunity for us to kind of think out publicly, and share those thoughts and to just kind of be edified by that.
Yeah.
But then to come together to talk about really, important spiritual things.
Yeah. What's God doing in our lives? And I can agree with you on that one. As I shared in the first episode, doing the interning with the School of Ministry that I had participated in. It was 4 years of an intense environment where you're sharing faith, you're learning, you're growing together, you're being challenged by each other, that kind of stuff. And so the study wasn't so much over. It was about theology, but it wasn't so. I don't know that it was that pointed that we're going to study theology right now to prepare you to be a priest. It was. You're still studying the Bible and all that kind of stuff. But really, that hyper intense environment where you're learning and growing and constantly being challenged. So I can totally agree with you on that one. and I love having these kind of conversations. I think one of the benefits of my wife and I have talked about this. One of the benefits, I mean, I travel quite a bit, not as much as some people I know, but it's a decent amount. And while I love to be home, I think in certain levels, I would just languish at home.
Right.
One, because of the call of God on my life, and if I was just regulated to one particular location, I think I would just constantly be thinking about, what about the churches here? What about the churches here? What about the churches here? Right. When the Lord said to me at one point, like, I don't really care about going to big, huge churches. Just the numbers don't really affect me or anything. It's just like, great if there's 5 people, if there's 1,000 people, whatever. Because the Lord said to me, who's going to go to the little guy? Because all these big churches has great big names. I mean, my wife's been listening to some Robert Morris stuff. Big mega church down in Texas. Good teacher, all that kind of stuff. But they've got great impactful speakers going. And the Lord said, who's going to go to the little churches, the churches of 50 and 100? And I would constantly be thinking about them, right? And not that I'm the only answer, right? But that just the way I'm wired, I would think that way. But the side benefit of being able to travel and minister in so many different places is I get to have more conversations like this.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm most of the people that I would consider close friends don't live in my city.
Yeah.
And and that's been the case for probably the last 10 years now. Is I have very close friends and very dear friends, and people that I communicate with all the time. I don't know how the missionaries did it 100 years ago without WhatsApp.
That's right. Yeah.
But I mean, I've got friends in India. I've got friends in Singapore. I've got friends out in the States. I've got friends in Western Canada that I chat with at least a couple times a month, and talking about how we're being challenged, that kind of stuff, and how we're growing, and especially when I see them and you get to sit down with them. I was in India for 2 weeks, sitting down with friends and just being able to talk about life with people that love Jesus. Right? It's just so I can totally understand that. I mean, it's a desperate need for us to have that community, to be able to share these kind of things. So, and with all that said, I hope if you're watching this on YouTube, please, comment on it. Send us an email. Go to the websites. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what's God doing in your life. How is Jesus impacting your journey? What are you learning and what are you growing in? I mean, we're not here because we think that we're the experts and we have something to offer you that's going to teach you. We're talking about just having conversations about life and God, and how we've discovered Him, how He's transforming us. And we hope to have other. The hope is we're going to have guests on and talk about how did they discover the life of God? How does God's life impacted their life? And what does that mean to them? Because each one of us, that's uniquely different. I love, if you look at the Old Testament, you look at the life of some of the prophets, you look at, and one of the clearest, starkest differences to me is Ezekiel and Isaiah, because both of them have an experience with the throne of God.
Right.
Ezekiel 1, 2, and 3, and then of course Ezekiel 40 to 48 with the temple. He sees essentially an elaboration on the same thing in Ezekiel 1 through 3, but Ezekiel 1 through 3 especially, where he sees these wheels and clouds, and he sees the Ancient of Days. Just this beautiful thing, right? And you have Isaiah sees the throne. And basically the way Isaiah describes the throne is the train of his robe filled the temple. Yeah, right. And the way Ezekiel describes the throne is an angel comes in Ezekiel 40 to 48 with a measuring rod and says, and Ezekiel's like, oh, great, we get to measure everything, right? There's just very different personalities in how they engaged and encountered God. And what stood out to them was significantly different between the two. Isaiah is captivated. There's obviously more to Isaiah's vision than we know, because he says there's a temple. The train of his robe filled the temple, right? But to Ezekiel describes the wheels, the beasts, the sea of glass. Maybe Ezekiel did the sea of glass, or John in Revelation, maybe. Either way. But in any case, Ezekiel's concerned with telling you all the parameters and the peripherals that he sees, right? And Isaiah's just like, I saw Jesus, right? I saw the Lord anyway. And so I just love that the uniqueness of the person comes out in their writing and how they encountered God and what they knew about God. And then we get this fuller picture of the life of God and who He is, because multiple people engaged. And one of the things the thing I like to tell myself about the Bible, and I don't think this is controversial, but basically the Bible is a collection of stories about how people were impacted by the life of God. And it's more than that. But when you look at it in simplicity, and I can read it and I can go, oh, they knew God this way. They knew God this way. They knew. I mean, if you talk like the difference between Abraham and John the Baptist, if you had a conversation with either one of them about what the blessing of God looks like, it would be a very different conversation between the two of them. Abraham, well, God wants to give you a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Everything I touch, it just flourishes, right? And John the Baptist would be, God wants to enrich your life spiritually. Yeah. And both of them are true about the blessing of God, but very different in how it's communicated, right? Based on. So anyway, I love coming together and being able to share my journey and your journey from very different backgrounds and find where do we find life and faith intersecting between my world and your world, and how is there similarities? What are the differences that we find? And then we can appreciate the differences, and we can see, oh, God actually works really similarly, and we see him across the board in really similar ways. So really, it's about having these casual conversations about how God is growing us spiritually, and what we've come to learn and appreciate about who he is and what he's doing. That's what I mean. I think we'd be in agreement on that.
I think so. Yes.
I remember you said at one point when we were chatting, it was probably about a year ago, just about the desire to get together. You'd referenced Tolkien and what would they call them? The Inklings.
The Inklings,
right? And how they just had this group of friends that would get together,
sure,
and basically upended common literature,
right?
And we became some of the most influential authors. Not even just in theology with Tolkien, with Lewis, but I mean, they defined a whole generation of literature and fiction and fantasy that just didn't really exist up until then.
Yeah, and I'm sure what they thought they were doing. I mean, I don't know if they ever commented on it, but I'm sure what they thought they were doing in the Eagle and Child in Oxford was just very ordinary.
Sure,
getting together for a beer and talking about whatever.
Right, so, they're just normal people. They weren't. We're going to. I can't imagine Tolkien said, he wrote him for his kids, right?
Right.
Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And he wasn't saying, I'm going to define a whole new literature genre and it's going to influence the world and create one of the top grossing film series of all time, right? So it's just not, the whole idea is you just are a person sharing your life. So we've got this term that we've called it silent fire. Maybe that's not important to anybody else. And I mean, I can tell the story about silent fire and why it's not even my language, but it is. But anyway, I don't know what you think about that term, because the rich history of contemplative literature and the fire of God and all that. Anyway, so when I was reading and studying through the Desert Fathers and trying to think of a way to just put the literature out that I'd been writing about the Desert Fathers, I studied through the 52 lives of the men and women and wrote individual articles for each one. So that's all on the Wind Ministries website. There's videos and all that kind of stuff with that. But I was meeting with a couple of friends, just kind of going, well, how do I? These guys have impacted me so much. I find that I probably think more. I don't think this is facetious to say, but I've studied the early church fathers for the last 5 or 10 years. I probably think more like in the early church fathers than I do the reformers now.
Right.
And so how have this so deeply impacted by the wisdom in the Desert Fathers? How do I couldn't think of a way to get that out there beyond just publishing it on the website and putting blog posts out that you hope eventually someone sees, and you get a comment once every 3 months. So if you're watching, please comment on the articles.
Make Josh really
make me happy. Yes. And so I was thinking about putting this collection together of writings and all of that, and then self-publishing it. And one of my friends, he said, well, why don't you call it Silent Fire? Because, so the reason behind calling it Silent Fire was they practiced silence and they encountered the fire of God.
Right.
And you find that throughout. I mean, I love David. He talks about while I was meditating, it's in the book of Psalms because it's David, 40 something. I can't think of exactly where. Anyway, while I was meditating, my heart was hot within me. Right. So in silence, I encountered the fire of God. And Jesus says, I've come to baptize you in the Holy Spirit and fire. And so I just think about that, the nature of the life of God, encountering him in silence, encountering him in solitude, and finding that life sustaining energy in encountering him. The Lord asked me a number of years ago, and when I was really first seriously saved. Growing up in church, when it became real when I was about 24, 25. And I was in an intense season of my life where I was fasting, week-long fasts. I had basically cut out all forms of media and entertainment. I'd go to work. I worked for my dad, and I would come home and I'd sit. I had this gigantic beanbag.
Nice, yeah.
It was great. I'd sit in the beanbag and I would just pray. It was just all of my time was spent in communion with the Father. That was basically my life. And the Lord said to me at one point, he says, "Are you ready to exist on my love?" And I said, "Yes, Lord, of course I'm ready to exist on your love." I had no idea what that meant. And I still don't know what that means, right? That's a lifelong journey, I think. But to me, the idea of silent fire is part of that existing on his love, existing on his life, being in him. That I know if my communion with him wanes, because you go through, having 3 kids, that can happen. If my communion with him wanes, I can feel it. Yeah. I'm like, oh. Yeah. But when I'm in him and with him, abiding in him, and his life is in me, this is John 14, 15, and 16 to me, is silent fire, is being before him, being with him, having my heart divulged and divested before him, fully known and before him. That's the only place of sustenance for life, for me.
Yeah. It's wonderful. I think it's a beautiful title, and I think for me, a lot of my mirroring yours, a lot of my time with God and where I've come to know God more closely has been in silence and
right.
Where I felt God move. So it's certainly that sort of contemplative prayer, and has been a part of communities I've been in,
right,
and a part of my own devotional life as well. So
right, yeah. So silent fire. That's
.com.
.com. .ca.
.ca.
Yeah, .ca. Yeah. Silentfire.ca. There's some of those .com.
I know.
They're like, we want $17,000 for.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
Maybe eventually.
We'll check the .net or whatever. Yeah.
We'll play the lottery, and eventually, if we win that, then we'll get
right.
the
We'll
.com.
get the
Yes, that's right. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Like, subscribe. If you're listening to the audio of this on Google Play or Apple or whatever podcast platform that you're listening through, share it with others, please. Send us an email, comment. You can go to the Win Ministries Facebook, which is just at Win Ministries CA if you do the search on Facebook. And you'll be able to see that there. You can look up Josh Hoffert on Facebook. You look up Colin Nicole on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I think St. Mary's and St. John has a Facebook.
Yeah, we do. I don't remember how I type it, but look us up. We're there.
Yeah, you can find it. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what are your thoughts about discovering the life of God, and how have you learned to exist on His love? How have you learned to exist on His life? What's going on in your lives? So please. We just want to hear from you guys, and we want to be a blessing to you guys. So I think that's a wrap on
part 2
of episode 1. Yeah.
Right on.
Okay. So see you guys next time.
Yeah.